14 in the business. Do you have a different image than the one we've come accustomed?
More than 50 million records sold. That's not just a number. That's the echo of a woman who didn't politely enter rock music in the 1970s. She kicked the door open and dared anyone to stop her. Her name is Suzi Quatro. For decades, fans whispered about one song, one moment, one connection that felt almost too real to be just music. When the Stumbling In played on the radio, people didn't just hear harmony, they felt something raw, vulnerable, electric. The chemistry between Suzi Quatro and Chris Norman was undeniable. Every note sounded like a confession. Every lyric felt personal. And the rumors, they never went away. Were they lovers? Was there a secret romance hidden behind studio doors? Or was the truth far more complicated and far more powerful than fans ever imagined? Now, at 75 years old, Suzi Quatro has finally decided to draw the line between myth and reality. For the first time, she speaks with calm honesty about what really happened between her and Chris Norman and what never did. This is not a story about scandal. It's a story about timing, respect, and the kind of unspoken musical chemistry that can change lives without crossing a single line. Before the world ever obsessed over that duet, before the rumors, before the legacy, there was a young girl in Detroit with a bass guitar, a fire in her chest, and absolutely no intention of asking permission. And that's where the real story begins, before the leather jumpsuits, before the chart-topping hits, before the world saw her as a symbol of rebellion. There was Detroit. Suzi Quatro was born Susan K. Quattrocchio on June 3rd, 1950, in a city where music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. Detroit breathed rhythm. Every street corner, every radio, every heartbeat carried sound. And from the moment Suzi could stand on her own 2 feet, that rhythm found its way into her bones. Music wasn't something she discovered later in life. It was already waiting for her at home. Her father, Art Quatro, was a working musician, and the house was always alive with instruments, rehearsals, and creative noise. There was no such thing as silence in the Quatro household, only melody, competition, and the unspoken expectation that if you had a voice, you used it. But even in a musical family, Suzi stood out. She wasn't the loudest. She wasn't the most obvious star. She was the dark horse, quietly watching, quietly learning, quietly building something inside herself that couldn't be ignored. By her teenage years, that inner fire had turned into action. Together with her sisters, Suzi formed an all-girl garage rock band called the Pleasure Seekers. At a time when female musicians were treated like novelties if they were taken seriously at all. These girls weren't asking for approval. They demanded attention. Suzi picked up the bass guitar, an instrument rarely placed in the hands of women back then, and made it her weapon. She shared lead vocals, commanded the stage, and projected a confidence that felt far bigger than her age. Even then, her style was forming. Sharp, fearless, unapologetic. While other young women were told to soften their image, wait their turn, or fit neatly into expectations, Suzi did the opposite. She leaned in. She got louder. She stood her ground. That decision to grab the bass, to lead instead of follow, to refuse invisibility, would define everything that came next. It wasn't rebellion for attention. It was rebellion for survival. Because Suzi knew something deep down, long before the world did. If she waited for permission, she'd be waiting forever. And fate was already moving behind the scenes, preparing a moment that would tear her away from Detroit and throw her straight into the center of the rock world. In the early 1970s, Suzi Quatro was still grinding, still proving herself, still fighting to be taken seriously in a world that looked at women in rock and rolled its eyes, and then, almost like destiny, finally got tired of waiting. Everything shifted. Her path crossed with the legendary British producer Mike Chapman, a man known for spotting the star power before the rest of the world even knew what it was looking at. He didn't just see a talented girl from Detroit. He saw a spark, something wild, something dangerous, something that couldn't be controlled. And Suzi? She didn't hesitate. With one fearless decision, she packed up her life and flew across the ocean to the United Kingdom. A gamble that could have destroyed her career before it even began. Leaving home wasn't romantic. It wasn't easy. It was terrifying. But Suzi wasn't built for comfort. At that time, America still hesitated when it came to women dominating hard rock. But Britain? Britain opened its arms and basically said, "All right then, prove it." And she did. In 1973, Suzi exploded onto the scene with Can the Ken, a song that didn't just hit the charts, it shook them. Loud, raw, unapologetic, it topped the UK charts and went on to sell over 2 million copies worldwide. This wasn't a hit, it was a declaration. Suzi Quatro had arrived, and she wasn't leaving. From that moment, the 1970s came her battlefield and her victory lap. Hit after hit followed. 48, Crash, Devilgate Drive, The Wild One. Each track carried thunderous bass lines, fierce vocals, and that signature attitude that refused to bow to anyone. When Suzi walked on stage in her leather gear, she didn't act like a guest in a man's world. She acted like the owner. There was nothing soft about her image, nothing cute or safe to make the industry comfortable. Suzi wasn't a trend, she was the real thing, but here's the twist. Just when people thought she'd peaked, she did something that made her even bigger. She stepped into television. In the mid-1970s, Suzi broke into millions of American living rooms as Leather Tuscadero on the hit sitcom Happy Days. Suddenly, audiences who had never heard a bass line like hers were staring at a woman who looked like she walked out of a rock concert and straight into primetime TV. And she didn't tone it down, not for a second. She brought the same fearless edge, the same charm, the same unstoppable energy, proving she wasn't just a musician trying acting. She was a multi-talented entertainer who could own any stage, any screen, any spotlight. But even with chart success and TV fame, Suzi Quatro's greatest impact wasn't just what she achieved. It was who she inspired. Because while the world watched her, young women everywhere were quietly thinking the same thing. If she can do it, maybe I can too. And decades later, some of the biggest rock queens in history would admit it out loud that Suzi made them believe. And while she was changing the world, life behind the scenes was changing too. Because even legends fall in love. Even legends build families. Even legends have chapters the public never truly sees. The world saw Suzi Quatro as unstoppable. A leather-clad rock force, a bass guitar slung low like a warning, a woman who looked like she could stare down the entire industry and win. And she did. But here's what most people forget about legends. They don't stop being human. While Suzi was inspiring a generation of artists, her impact was quietly spreading through rock history itself. Names that would later become icons, Joan Jett, Chrissie Hynde, Debbie Harry, The Runaways, all pointed back to Suzi as proof that a woman could stand in the center of the storm and not get blown away. She didn't just make a space for women in rock, she rewrote the space. And as the years rolled on, Suzi refused to fade. While other artists slowly slipped into nostalgia, she kept moving forward, still recording, still touring, still showing up with the same grit that shocked the world in the 70s. Albums like Back to the Drive and No Control didn't feel like a comeback. They felt like a reminder she was still here, still loud, still dangerous. Then she found yet another way to connect with fans: radio. When Suzi joined BBC Radio 2, she didn't host like a polite celebrity. She brought her whole self to the microphone, mixing legendary tracks with behind-the-scenes stories only a true rock veteran could tell. Her show Rockin' with Suzi Q didn't feel like a program, it felt like a stepping inside her world. And when fans responded to that authenticity, she pushed it further with Wake Up Little Suzi, keeping that same spirited energy that made people trust her voice, not just as a singer, but as a storyteller. But behind all the music, all the stages, all the spotlight, Suzi's personal life was shifting too. In 1976, right at the peak of her success, she married her longtime guitarist and musical partner, Len Tuckey. From the outside, it sounded perfect. Two musicians, one life, one rhythm. Their love was built on shared stages, shared dreams, and the strange intimacy that comes from living in the non-stop chaos of touring. Together, they raised two children, while Suzi's career kept moving at full speed. And that balance, it wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, because motherhood and international fame don't politely take turns. They collide, they demand, they pull you in opposite directions until you're stretched thin. Yet Suzi handled it the way she handled everything, with grit, stubborn determination, and a refusal to let life break her. But even the strongest bonds face pressure. Over time, her marriage went through storms, the kind that don't show up in interviews, the kind that happen quietly behind closed doors when the crowds are gone and the adrenaline fades. By 1992, after 16 years together, Suzi's marriage to Len Tuckey came to an end. And that wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the end of a partnership built on love, music, and family all tangled together. Still, Suzi didn't crumble, she stayed standing. In fact, years earlier, back in 1980, Suzi and Len had invested in what they believed would be their forever home, a grand old manor near Chelmsford, tucked away in the English countryside. That house became more than a home. It became her anchor. After the divorce, she didn't walk away from it. She stayed, raising her kids there, turning those walls into her refuge, a place where fame couldn't reach her, a place where she could breathe like a normal person again. And then, in 1993, she opened her heart one more time. Suzi remarried, this time to Rainer Haas, a German concert promoter who understood the rhythm of her life, the chaos of her world, the reality behind the stage lights. With him, she found companionship that felt steady, grounded, real. But life keeps turning. In 2006, her manor filled with warmth again when her daughter and grandchild moved back in, bringing laughter and noise into halls that had known too much silence. Then eventually, they moved on. And Suzi faced something even rock legends aren't immune to: the quiet ache of an empty home. By late 2008, she admitted she was struggling with empty nest syndrome. That emotional shift led to a bold decision. She chose to put her Essex manor up for sale, not because she was running from her past, but because she was stepping into a new chapter. She continued splitting her time between Essex and Hamburg, staying connected to her husband's roots, yet always carrying Detroit in her heart. And through all of this, the fame, the reinvention, the family changes, the private storms, she remained what she always was, a woman who refuses to fade. And then we arrive at the moment the world still whispers about, the collaboration that refuses to die, the duet that made people question everything. Because no matter how legendary Suzi's career became, one song kept glowing like it had unfinished business, stumbling in, and the name tied to it forever, Chris Norman. No matter how many hits Suzi Quatro released, no matter how many stages she conquered, no matter how many decades she outlasted, one collaboration kept shining with a glow that felt different, because it wasn't just a song, it was stumbling in. And for more than 40 years, people have treated that duet like a locked box, shaking it, listening to it rattle, trying to guess what secret might be hidden inside. In 1978, when producer Mike Chapman teamed Suzi Quatro with Chris Norman, the lead singer of Smokey, nobody expected fireworks. It was supposed to be simple. A studio session, a good track, maybe a radio hit if luck decided to smile. But the moment they started working together, something happened. Not the kind of something tabloids crave, the kind of something musicians dream about. Suzi later described Chris as one of the most down-to-earth, genuine people she had ever worked with in an industry full of inflated egos. Calm, kind, grounded, no games, no competition, no power struggle, just music. From the very first rehearsal, their connection clicked. Their voices blended like they were built for each other. The way two colors merge into one without effort. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel planned. It felt inevitable. And when they recorded the song, that ease became the heartbeat of everything listeners would later obsess over, because the chemistry was real, the emotion sounded real, the vulnerability felt real, and people couldn't accept that something that powerful could exist without romance behind it. Then the song hit the world, and the world didn't let go. Stumbling In soared to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States, becoming a global favorite that still refuses to fade. Decades later, it's still being sung, streamed, and replayed like a memory people don't want to lose. But here's what Suzi says mattered most. It wasn't the chart position. It wasn't record sales. It was the experience, the laughter in the studio, the creative spark that kept them both smiling, the mutual respect that made everything flow without tension. Chris had a natural warmth, Suzi said, something that made her instantly comfortable, and that comfort is rare in the music business, especially for someone like Suzi, who had spent her entire career being the tough one, the leader, the fighter who had to protect her space. Yet with Chris, sharing the spotlight felt effortless because they weren't trying to outshine each other. They were building something together. And that's the part fans often misunderstand. They hear that kind of harmony and assume it must be romantic. But Suzi has been crystal clear about what it truly was. Yes, there was a deep bond. Yes, there was genuine affection. But it wasn't a love affair. It was admiration. It was trust. It was a rare kind of friendship that allows magic to happen without anyone crossing a line. Suzi even admitted she can't help but laugh when she hears the rumors, because the truth is simpler and, in her eyes, even more beautiful. At the time, both of them were married, and they respected those boundaries completely. That's the truth Suzi wanted people to finally understand. What made their duet timeless wasn't scandal, It was sincerity. What they shared wasn't romance. It was something just as rare, a natural musical connection that can't be faked, a bond rooted in respect. And that bond didn't disappear when the song ended. Even after all these years, Suzi and Chris stayed friends. They crossed paths again through interviews, tribute shows, and anniversary celebrations of the song that forever linked their names. And every time they meet, Suzi says it feels like no time has passed. The laughter returns, the comfort returns, the easy friendship returns, like they're right back in that studio again. And when she looks back now, she doesn't see Stumbling In as just a hit record. She sees it as a defining moment, one of those unexpected turns that reshaped how the world would remember her. She knows she'll always be known as the fearless rocker with the bass guitar and the fire, but she also knows that for millions of people, she'll forever be remembered as the voice of that duet. And she's embraced that fully, because in a strange way, that song revealed a softer side of Suzi Quatro, still powerful, but more open, more human, more real. Now, at 75, she's still out there, touring, recording, inspiring artists who weren't even born when she first hit the stage. And when she reflects on her life, the fame, the records, the reinvention, the barriers she broke, she never hesitates to say that her collaboration with Chris Norman sits near the very top. It was a gift. And Chris, she says, was part of that gift. When Suzi Quatro looks back now, she doesn't talk about stumbling in the way people usually talk about an old hit. She talks about it like a moment in time that never truly ended. Because the truth is, songs don't last 40 plus years just because they sound good. They last because they hold something human inside them. And Suzi believes that's exactly why Stumbling In refuses to fade. Most people think it's a love song, but Suzi says the meaning is deeper than romance. To her, it's about uncertainty, about taking chances, about stepping into something new that feels thrilling and terrifying at the same time. It's about those moments you don't plan for, the ones that sneak up on you quietly and then change your life forever. That's why she says everyone at some point understands what it feels like to stumble into something that leaves a mark, a new chapter, a new connection, a sudden leap, a turning point that arrives without warning. And when people hear that duet, they feel that truth even if they can't explain it. That's why it reaches every generation. That's why young listeners who weren't alive in 1978 still replay it like it belongs to them. Because the song isn't just about love, it's about vulnerability. And vulnerability never goes out of style. Suzi also makes one thing clear. The story that people tried to turn into gossip was never gossip to her. Her bond with Chris Norman was built on something rare in the industry: trust, comfort, a shared respect that made the studio feel safe. She wasn't chasing drama. She was chasing music. And Chris, in her eyes, wasn't a scandal. He was part of a memory she still treasures. That's why she speaks about him with warmth instead of mystery. Because time didn't erase that bond, it just proved it was real. And when she talks about meeting him again over the years, interviews, tribute shows, anniversaries, she describes it like opening a door and stepping into the same room. No awkwardness, no distance, just the same laughter, the same ease, the same quiet understanding that some people leave a mark on your life without ever needing romance to do it. That's the kind of truth Suzi wanted fans to hear. Not the version built by rumors, but the version built by reality. The kind of connection that doesn't burn everything down, but still lasts. And if you step back and look at the full arc of her life, that message fits Suzi Quatro perfectly. A girl from Detroit who refused to be placed in a box. A woman who shattered barriers for women in rock. An icon who reinvented herself through decades of shifting culture. A mother who carried a family through the chaos of fame. A survivor who refused to fade. And even now, at 75, she's still proving the same thing she proved in the 1970s. Breaking barriers isn't about age, it's about attitude. Because real rock and roll spirit doesn't get quieter over time, it gets louder, and maybe that's the final truth behind Stumbling In. Not that it hit a romance, but that it captured a rare moment when two artists met at the right time with the right voices and created something that would outlive them both. A song that still whispers to anyone standing at the edge of the unknown. So if you've ever felt like you were stepping into something new, if you've ever taken a risk and hoped you wouldn't fall, if you've ever stumbled forward anyway, then you already understand why this duet still matters, because some songs don't just play in the background. They follow you, they remind you, they mark you, and Tumbling In is one of them. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Do you think Suzi Quatro and Chris Norman's connection was more powerful because it stayed pure? Because it stayed rooted in respect? I'll be reading your thoughts. And if you want more deep stories like this about music legends, hidden truths, and the moments that shaped them, stay right here. Because the next story is even wilder.